But let me quickly introduce myself and my panelists, my fellow panelists. I'm Brendan Goss. I am the Senior Innovation and Accelerator Manager in Tangent in Trinity College Dublin. And Tangent is Trinity College's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Centre. My guests tonight are Ron Imick, author, intergalactic futurologist, superstar, who knows a thing or two about climate technology and helping startups in particular, but other companies too, in terms of mapping out their sustainability strategies. And also by Aideen O'Hara, who is the co-founder of Sustainability Works, which is a sustainability consultancy business in Dublin, based in Dublin. We're myself and Aideen are both based in Ireland. Ron is based in, what planet are you on, Ron?
I am in planet Spain at the moment.
Planet Spain, where it's always hot. And he has first-hand knowledge of wildfires and lack of water.
Correct. Yes.
What we're going to do, folks, this evening is we're going to just talk in fairly informal terms about the challenges that we see the built environment facing, and we're also going to name check the accelerator program, which we're all part of running, which is the Built Environment Climate Accelerator, to which startups and scaling companies and SMEs who are pivoting with new products for the built environment are more than welcome to consider submitting a proposal to over the next couple of weeks. I think the deadline is the 9th of September, but we'll come back around to that particular subject in a few moments. Anybody who feels like asking a question of us, just stick your question into the chat and I'll share it with the panelists. I'm going to quickly kick off by asking Ron,
Yes.
in broad terms, based on the kind of work you've been doing, Ron, and the thinking you've been doing in recent years, specifically around the built environment, where do you see the challenges from the point of view of introducing new innovations, circular innovations into the built environment value chain as things stand?
Well, if you look at the construction industry, but in particular, they're one of the highest emitter of, they have the highest carbon footprint, I think, of all industries. And if you look at some of the hard trends, such as regulation, consumerism, I think, and even just the availability of materials, the only choice you will have as a company to become sustainable or circular. And the other thing, which is, I think, the most interesting trend, is that you increasingly find literature where we are going, but where they are suggesting that the business models that we're currently applying are no longer feasible, and that within between 5, 10, 15 years, I hope 5, but it might be 10 years, your business model will be calculated at natural capital cost, which means that you will have to, all the things you take out of the climate, you will have to replace at restorative levels, which means that most business models will become unsustainable. So a linear economic model is no longer feasible. And I think circular is the only way to go. And then in general, the internet is a very big business opportunity, but the climate change opportunity is absolutely massive, not only from a business opportunity, but also from a moral perspective. So I think circular is the only way to go. And I think one of the reasons we created this accelerator is not only for the startups to get them to scale faster, but this is a fantastic opportunity for existing companies to reinvent their business model and look at the opportunities that circular is going to offer. And I genuinely think that if you're not circular in the next 10, 15 years, you will be bankrupt.
Okay, that's very optimistic.
Yes. Yes.
Aideen, in terms of the built environment and the huge complexity of what we consider to be the built environment, which is not just the materials that buildings consist of, but it's about infrastructure around those buildings. It's about infrastructure in going into the development of those buildings, and infrastructure required to heat, to create energy, and infrastructure required to manage waste out of those buildings. So it's a hugely complex mosaic when we think about it. Where do you see opportunities for companies in this particular kind of prism, if you like?
So there is, Yeah, there's huge opportunities. And I suppose it's worth even just stepping back and thinking about that mosaic even a little bit more. And I suppose recognizing that when we talk about the built environment and all the various services that link into the built environment, we're really talking about two very different sectors. We're talking about the built environment commercial sector and the built environment residential sector. And within both of those sectors, you have existing buildings, so buildings that have been built for the last number of years or decades, and you have new build. And within all of those existing combinations, new, existing, commercial and residential, there's huge opportunities. And the scale of opportunity will vary depending on commercial to residential. For new build, we have, to a degree, figured out a lot of the big issues around reducing the operational footprint of the building from an energy point of view. Of course, there's always kind of incremental changes that can be made, like adding in behind the meters electricity generation and storage and making the building smarter. Of course, there's always lots you can do there. But if we think fundamentally where the big opportunities are, it's around how do we retrofit existing commercial building stock? How do we retrofit existing housing stock to a degree that reduces their consumption of energy? And then when we think about the new building, and it kind of, because everything ultimately here, you know, in how we need to think about this, like Ron has talked about circular a lot, but everything does come back to carbon because everything has a carbon number. So the whole built environment construction sector is thinking about carbon and how to reduce that carbon number. And so I said, we've done a pretty good job at trying to figure out, well, how do we reduce the operational carbon number? The big gap still, for even for new build, is how do we reduce the embodied carbon number? So there's a big opportunity there to figure that out. And that embodied carbon number, I suppose, ways to reduce that, that's really where you start looking at the materials that are used in the building to make sure that, I suppose, they're as sustainable as they can be, they have a lower carbon footprint, and systems then to, I suppose, design the building from the very start so that it makes it much more adaptable, and it's almost like designed for deconstruction. So when you need to change the use of the building, you can switch all of those materials into something else and extend their value. There's also a huge opportunity, I suppose, at the construction stage itself, whether it's at, you know, ground level, groundworks for new, completely new build, or even during that retrofit stage. A lot of the equipment and machinery and the plant, all of that goes into building, that needs to be decarbonized. So there's huge, I suppose, opportunities, but within that, you know, there's still kind of opportunities around data and IoT and how to use that more effectively. How buildings can be, I suppose, standalone kind of energy positive buildings. How so there's definitely lots more that can be done. And I guess the kind of the areas that we haven't really touched on yet in the built environment, but they're there for exploration, are it's the intersection between the built environment and construction sector and nature and biodiversity. Of course, if you're doing a new build construction site, you're going on a brownfield or greenfield site, and there's a certain element of there where you're interacting with nature, but it's far more fundamental than that, because you have to think about nature and biodiversity up the value chain. So where are you getting your iron from? Where are you getting your steel from? Where are you getting your timber from? And those communities, what are you doing? What impact are you having on those communities and the environment in those communities, and how much carbon does it emit? So there's a whole kind of way that we have to kind of begin to rethink the kind of construction and built environment sector. And I suppose the sector itself has to move from thinking about their own operations to thinking about where they sit in a value chain and their overall impact in that value chain. And I suppose to Ron's point, that means that there is huge opportunities there for existing businesses who are within a construction and built environment supply chain to rethink well, you know, this is the way to question why they've been doing things a certain way for all of these years. And is there an alternative way to do it that reduces the carbon footprint? And generally, by adopting a more circular approach, so extending the life of something, extending the value, you will theoretically, it should reduce the carbon footprint of everything you do. But more importantly, in all of this, the construction sector, whilst it's you know, prime for decarbonisation, they're also cost conscious. So in all of these things, you know, the price, how you price it and how you kind of price that, the future state of carbon taxes, all of that kind of stuff needs to be taken into consideration.
The the traditional push-pull that we talk about when we're talking about introducing a strategy or trying to make a strategy work in a particular commercial environment is an interesting one within the built environment, because you've got such a complex stakeholder map, I suppose. But Ron, where do you see a kind of a relatively straightforward point of entry for a young independent business that's trying to get into this space, in terms of the pressure that we see being exerted by the regulatory authorities, but also by shareholders and big companies?
I think it's just and it's a message we keep on giving to everybody, which is ultimately this is the value proposition, and the good news is that carbon, water, soil erosion, you just name it, pollution, will all become commercial models. So if you project a circular business model 3 to 5 years into the future, you have an incredibly compelling business proposition. And I think the value you're actually delivering to your customers in monetary terms outside of the climate impact is what it's going to, it's the focus that every startup should take, including existing companies, because all the benefits, the climate benefits will have a monetary value in the future.
We're just, if I can segue a little bit for the audience, just to enlighten them about the accelerator program that we're involved with. We're running a built environment climate accelerator in association with EIT Climate Kick, and also in close collaboration with Green Tech HQ, which is a new innovation hub based in the southeast of Ireland. Ourselves and Trinity and Ron and Aideen will be delivering the program. And we're basically recruiting for companies now from across the globe to consider participating in the program.
Don't forget the United Nations.
Yeah, well, the United Nations will be supporters of it. Certainly, we're aligned with the ambitions and the objectives of the United Nations Environment Program, particularly around its high performance building strategy. But we're looking and we're encouraging companies to consider submitting an application. And before this call is up in the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'll stick the link into the chat box for those of you who are interested, or if you want to share it with people in your network. And the program itself, Ron, gives a flavor of what the program will be like in terms of how it's structured. And
it's a sort of a hybrid program where we have a number of standard sessions: enterprise sales, business proposition, value proposition, pitching. But then a huge element of the program is one-to-one coaching, and that's highly individual dependent, because we're going to have even the current application. There's a huge wide spectrum of different type of companies, so you will have a lot of one-to-ones. And I think the biggest power of our program is that if you take it from a connectivity perspective, we've been running these programs for how long now, Brendan? 5 years. So we have a network of alumni. We have access to the Climate Kick network. We have our own personal networks. There are links with the United Nations. So if you're looking for a shortcut into introductions into large companies that might be interested in running your proposition as a pilot, this is the accelerator to go for. So in short, it's a shortcut to commercialization. And
we're looking for solutions that can promote things like low carbon design, circular materials, modern methods of construction, energy systems, maintenance systems. The list goes on. Biodiversity,
IoT, data,
water. Yeah. So we're looking for a wide range of solutions, because it is an incredibly complex picture that we're trying to provide solutions to. Aidan, how do you think we best influence the kind of, let's call it the hegemony or the stakeholders that are already in the marketplace, the relatively conservative construction companies or property development companies who are pretty set in their ways, but now there's a little bit of pressure, as I mentioned, upon them to try to start changing things. How do we get them to engage more closely with the ecosystem where new innovations are bubbling up, but where those independent owners are frustrated at the kind of level of resistance that sometimes they face?
Yeah, I guess that a lot of the property companies, so construction companies, real estate property, institutional investors, they're all, I suppose, under pressure now because they have to disclose on what they're doing under the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is a new European directive. And through that, they have 10 standards that they are going to have to report against. But that, in a traditional sense, disclosing against E, S, and G topics can be a fairly bland activity. But because so many companies are being forced to disclose the same types of information, it's creating a level playing field within that kind of corporate world where they are going to be evaluated by their investors to go, well, company A versus company B, who has a net zero carbon plan in place, who has the most advanced plan, and who actually is doing something innovative in terms of investing in technology to actually meet their net zero carbon targets, and how credible is that? So that CSRD directive is going to change the landscape, and it already is, because a lot of the bigger companies already, I suppose, are taking what they have to do around net zero carbon and achieving their targets a lot more seriously. And they're beginning to really start to look at innovation as a way to meet those targets. So they are beginning to evaluate all the different, I suppose, systems and solutions and technologies that might work for them. But I suppose what we are seeing, is all of those companies are so unique in themselves. So, they have very specific challenges. And whilst you can group maybe some of them, they are reasonably specific, but they are all beginning to engage, and they are all beginning to lift their head above the parapet and go, what is out there? But I suppose and through this program, we have the opportunity to engage with a large number of these corporates who, want to articulate what their challenges, the challenges that they're facing, what they are. And I think that's really good and really powerful. And there's a lot of, there's real estate property companies, construction companies who are willing to come and tell us what those challenges are and the types of solutions they need. And, I think what we have to, I suppose, understand is, for a lot of these companies, they are very much in this demand-led innovation space where they have these specific challenges and they need them solved. So I suppose for the entrepreneurs and for the startups and the SMEs that are out there, it's understanding what those challenges are and seeing how you can adapt your proposition to them and create a deal around that. So, but I think there's definitely a lot more companies coming to the table because they really have no choice but to do it.
Yeah. Ron, give us an idea of one of your favorite recent built environment solutions.
It's
putting you on the spot.
Okay, the one that I will always remember is we got this proposal in for this has nothing to do with the built environment, for recycling baby nappies. And I went, oh God, another baby nappies startup. But this baby nappy startup was very different because they weren't interested in the baby nappies. They were interested in the baby poo. Because one of the things that is not much talked about is the whole problem that we're facing, which is soil erosion. And our soil, I think, dependent on who you listen to, is probably capable of delivering crops for namely the next 30 and 40 years. And after that, we are finished. If you use baby poo as a fertilizer, you get incredibly good soil. And the vegetables that grow from baby poo fertilized soil is full of minerals and vitamins. And I thought that was just the most interesting startup that I've ever seen. It didn't go far, but I think as a concept, I think it's incredibly interesting because water is interesting, carbon is interesting, but I think the ones that we are ignoring at our peril is soil.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And the thing about the so-called built environment, as we understand it, is any existing technologies out there can be deployed. They have transversal applications. They can be
Completely.
deployed into this particular environment with a bit of creativity and a bit of original thinking. Isn't that right? Um, Dog poo doesn't count, unfortunately, does it? Because we could be millionaires if that's the case.
Or cat poo. Yeah, I have 2 cats, so no, that doesn't count.
Yeah, yeah, I wouldn't cat, yeah. Listen, I think I wanted to quickly invite anybody who might have a question that they want to throw into the chat to do so now, because we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. The program, we're talking about the built environment Clim Accelerator, so we're hoping to start the program in late September. Applications will be accepted up until about the 9th of September, I think. But that link that I put into the chat box will explain all and demystify the process for you, just in case you think it's a bit too complicated. Let me put one last question to both of you before we wrap it up. Aideen, retrofit or demolition?
Retrofit.
Ooh.
Or demolition?
Retrofit. From an embodied carbon point of view, it's retrofit. But then if you're trying to balance social issues and move things on quickly, it probably is demolition. But if you're thinking about carbon and embodied carbon, it's retrofit.
Ron?
If you believe in exponential as a way of the way technology is capable of solving a number of problems, I think demolition with a very good recycling program and some magic technology source, maybe demolition is the problem, because then we can immediately move to new build and apply all kinds of the new materials. I think we're going to be growing buildings out of mushrooms, for example. So I think demolition should be an option.
Well, we're already creating 3D printed buildings, isn't that correct?
Well, and 4D
For example.
printing printed buildings, which can actually shape shift
Yeah,
depending on the needs you have. So which is just a general comment. You shouldn't underestimate how quick technology trends are starting to come to maturity. And exponential is something that I think we're all starting to underestimate. And the ultimate consequence of exponential is abundance. And I think if you look at energy, there is a distinct possibility that energy will be available in abundance once we embrace solar and wind to its full extent.
yeah.
And that will happen with all kinds of other materials as well. But I'm an optimist.
No, I think it's worthwhile pointing out as well, particularly in that regard, that when we can't focus solely on this issue as being a first world problem. This is a universal problem, and it applies equally to the poorest nations in the world as it does to the most comfortable ones. So, when we're talking about harnessing the kind of raw materials that are available to us, where they are in abundance, there's a real opportunity there to kind of reinvent an environment for people that they can live in comfortably as well. So, but that goes equally to just the last question I'm going to ask you both is, in terms of the fragmented nature of markets that we're familiar with in Europe, for example, and probably to a certain extent in North America, the challenge that a startup or a small company faces in terms of bringing a solution to market, it's not a uniform path necessarily. Sure, it isn't. It can be quite, well, it's not linear, that's for sure. How does a company kind of circumvent the challenges that it might face in getting to market in one jurisdiction, and kind of reinvent itself then for the built environment challenge that might appear or manifest itself in another jurisdiction?
If you find the right partner, and that's where I think we have a advantage to some of the other acceleration programs, that partner will introduce you into the fragmented markets that you need to be in. So if you get the right value proposition, if you get the first commercial pilot, you prove your point, your partner, which is a large company, will then help you to access the markets that you want to go for.
Is that a strategic partner or is
Markets,
it an industry partner?
Both.
and the markets aren't as fragmented as you might think in a way, because from an energy perspective, from a climate perspective, from a built environment perspective, whilst there are some nuances in every jurisdiction in Europe, we are governed by the same overarching kind of policies and directives. So certain countries will be more advanced than others. They'll have bylaws and all of that. But generally, if you're designing a solution, you might lead in one market, but it should be a straightforward enough fix to get into other European markets. But to Ron's point, you will still, like ideally, if you want to scale and grow, it is about some form of partnership. The US, you know, its policies are different to European policies, but it's still, certain states are quite advanced and maybe quite similar to Europe in many fronts. So it is just about making sure you are solving the problems that are needed by the sector. And then, you know, if you're from the industry, if you have that connectivity yourself, great. But, you know, it's very hard to make any company scale without some form of partnership.
Okay.
I think the message is climate change is a big problem. It's a big opportunity, but fundamentally, business principles apply. So if you have the right value proposition and you find the right partners that are actually enthralled by the value proposition that you're offering, you will go far. If you have a crap value proposition, you will not going to go anywhere. And that goes for every startup. In a lot of cases, what we're trying to do with our accelerator is not that different from all the other accelerators. I think the difference is the partners that we have gathered to help us to scale climate solutions faster.
Great. Okay, listen, on that note, thank you both very, very much for your contribution and your time this evening. Folks, as I say, the link is in the chat. You want to share it or use it yourselves, please be our guests, and hopefully we'll get to meet you in a couple of weeks if that's the case. But for now, thank you very much for taking the time and indulging us, and take care of yourselves.